guys, Coral System here. Um, Today I wanted to continue my series on DID in the media, and today's episode is going to be on the movie Split. Um, I did take notes. So today we're going to be going over the accuracies and inaccuracies in the movie Split, and how sometimes there are kind of gray areas with that. So Split is, spoiler alert for this video, Split is a part of the Unbreakable series by M. Night Shyamalan. And that series, if you guys don't know what it is, it's a superhero series based off of, I believe, a comic book. But it's a superhero sequence, with, like, there's a character, the first movie was a character named Mr. Glass, and he had a disorder that caused his bones to break extremely easily. There's another character, I believe his name is Mr. Unbreakable, I'm not sure, but I know he's a part of the Unbreakable series, that he's pretty much indestructible. But that's basically, Split is the big reveal at the end. Split is a continuation of the Unbreakable series, which is why certain topics of inaccuracies and superhuman abilities in this is going to come up. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the accuracies. And there's actually quite a lot of accuracies in it. It's just the fact that the inaccuracies and the dangerous rhetorics kind of overshadow that. So Dennis, the first one being like Dennis being banned from the front. Not Dennis, it was Kevin. Kevin's the host of the system. And in the middle to the end, Kevin is blocked away and banned from the front. That is something that is accurate. Hosts can, not just hosts, but any alters can be locked away and banned from the front. No, I was actually right. Dennis and Kevin at different points are banned from the front. But we'll get into why Dennis is banned from the front later, because he's banned from the front because they reveal that he's a pedophilic alter. And then Kevin, at the end, is banned from the front to protect him from reality. Dennis being banned from the front is technically accurate if an alter is being abusive or persecutory. Other alters can, keep them from fronting. That is unfortunately accurate, although the chances of an alter being a pedophile is extremely low. I'm not going to say that it never happens, because that'd be a lie if I said, oh, no alter can have the possibility of being an abusive person. Of course they can. It's just highly unlikely. And statistics show that it's highly unlikely. People with DID are more likely to be victims than abusers. Another accuracy is subtle switches. There's one scene in the therapist office where Dennis switches to, I believe, Barry, and the mannerisms change, the facial expressions change, the way they carry themselves change, and it's very subtle. It's not like a lot of media where it's 20 minutes of dissociating and a dramatic change. That can happen at times, but a lot of switches in DID are a lot more subtle. And unless you really look for it, oftentimes you can't tell it happens. And that's something that I feel like they did very well. They didn't try to dramatize the switches. There are a couple of switches in the movie that are very dramatized when they go to certain abusive alters. But the subtle changes I felt were very accurate and very well done. Another thing they got right was being trauma focused. DID is a traumagenic disorder. They can't say that it's 100% caused by trauma, because unfortunately in psychology is a science, and they always have to leave room for variables. And that's why they can't say 100% it's a trauma disorder, but there's enough causation in statistics to say we can infer it's a traumagenic disorder. We just can't say 100% it's completely caused by trauma, because that's not how science works. So that's kind of why it's labeled as a dissociative disorder instead of a traumagenic disorder, because it's more focused on the dissociation and the trauma is the causation of it. Another thing they got right is Dennis having OCD due to trauma. In the story, Dennis, the host, Kevin, used to get highly abused whenever things were out of order. And so Dennis came into the light, which is their version of saying he came to be, and had OCD to be able to keep things tidy, keep things organized, as a protection to keep Kevin from being abused. And that's something I feel like they really did well, because oftentimes alters will come and have certain quirks or certain things about them, maybe possibly certain meeting certain criteria for disorders, have different things they do in order to fulfill their role in the system. And having an alter that has OCD to protect from a perfectionist mother, I feel like is very accurate to DID and how that can certainly happen. Kevin's name being a trigger for him, I feel like that is accurate due to the story. It's one of those gray areas, because with DID, if you call the host's name, they're not always going to come out if that's not a trigger for them. In Kevin's case, his mother used to always scream his name at him when she was about to hurt him. And so for him, when he hears his name, his full name, it's a traumagenic trigger for him to come out. And I feel like that's a gray area for how DID can work. On one end, I believe that can be accurate in a traumagenic trigger making Kevin come out. On the other hand, I feel like it's more likely that him being the host and him being not the original alter, because not every system has an original alter, but him at least being the host and the one that goes on and takes care of day-to-day life, I feel like it would be a lot more accurate to say that if he heard the traumagenic trigger, a protective alter would probably switch out and be more defensive of him. But again, every system works differently, so if that's how his system works, that's completely accurate to his system, and that's not my place to say, oh, that's wrong, that's not accurate. It's just one of those things where take it with a grain of salt. For some systems, yes, that can happen. For other systems, no, a protector would most likely come out. It very much depends. Every system is going to be unique. The use of we and us, that I think they did really well on too, because especially when they differentiated, because the host, Kevin, used I statements and referred to himself as if he was the only one there. And I feel like that can be accurate at times, where the host can be like I when referring to themselves. But when other alters were out, they used we statements and referred to themselves as we or us. And I feel like that is very accurate, where when you live your life multiple, that you can catch yourself referring to yourself as us, we, because you don't even think about it, because it's like you sometimes forget that other people aren't like that, and you don't even realize you're doing it half the time. And I feel like that's something that is very accurate at times. Again, not every system will do it, but there's a lot of systems that do that. So I feel like that's something they did really well. Fighting for the light, that's something I feel like they did really well. In the movie Switch, they refer to when a alter is fronting as coming into the light, which I feel like may be accurate for some systems, may not be accurate for others. It really depends, but that's just how Kevin's system works, and that's how they refer to it as. But there's a scene where all of the altars are fighting for the light, and I feel like that's very accurate. And sometimes where if something is going on and different altars are trying to fight for the front, that's definitely something that can happen, and it's definitely something that they portrayed really well in talking about all the altars internally fighting and communicating, and I feel like they did that very well. Another thing they did was rapid switching. They showed two different cases, at least in what I watched. They showed two different cases of rapid switching, and that the performance was really accurate. Um, I believe the actor's name is Kevin McAvoy, and he did a fantastic job at looking into mannerisms, looking into different portrayals. I do know that he talked about researching DID beforehand, and I feel like that really showed in his performance, despite the supernatural inaccuracies of the movie. From a psychological standpoint, at least in the things they did well, I do feel like he did a very good job at portraying DID at times. At least in the mannerisms, the traumagenic aspects, and the different small details of DID that other people would otherwise miss if they weren't aware of DID and how it works. I feel like he did a very good job at embodying that and making you fully believe that there were different people inside this man's body. And I feel like he did a very fantastic job at that. So I do have to give him props for that. Um, but the rapid switching was really well. All the altars were coming out, they were cycling through, they were talking to one another, and that's definitely something that can happen, especially when a system is like really stressed out, something really big is going on, and a bunch of altars are trying to come out at the same time. It's definitely something that was very accurately portrayed, at least in my experience of having DID. Another thing they did well was there's one scene in the therapist office where Dennis is pretending to be Kevin, the host. And he was doing a very good job, but they did a good job at showing the little details of how you could tell it wasn't Kevin. Dennis has OCD, so there were many aspects of him kind of like subtly moving things, because it's like he was trying to pretend to be Kevin, but some of his mannerisms and some of his compulsions were sneaking through. And I feel like that's both accurate and inaccurate. On one hand, I think it's very accurate for some alters to really suck at pretending to be the host. I know I have some alters that are terrible at pretending to be me, and then I have other alters that are fantastic and 100% can pretend to be me, and no one would ever be able to tell the difference. So I feel like it was very accurate in that one alter does, like, in systems, alters can 100%, especially in protective scenarios, especially since it is a disorder that is about survival. Alters will 100% pretend to be the host in order to keep up the facade of we're fine, everything's fine, don't let people know that we're a system. I think that's 100% something that they did very well. And the small mannerism sneaking through, I think, was kind of amusing for me, because I know I remember hearing from friends when some of my alters were pretending to be me and the small mannerisms sneaking through, and so I was like, oh yeah, 100% I could see that happening. Another thing they did was fronting and not remembering things. I know that memory lapses in DID are very dependent on the individual. Some people are going to have higher levels of amnesia than others. In my system, my amnesia is exceptionally high. And so he described, Kevin in the story described how he started and was on a bus, and then he blacked out, and then he woke up, and the two people that one of his alters had kidnapped were in the basement. And so when he woke up in the basement seeing them, he was very confused. he was asking them, did I hurt you? I don't remember anything. I was on a bus. He started panicking. I was on a bus. I was on a bus. And I felt like, will that happen in DID? Chances are, not really. Again, DID, you're not violent. Very rarely are DID systems violent. If a DID system is violent, 9 times out of 10, it's out of protection and feeling like there's an impending threat to the system. But alters are usually not violent for no reason. Alters aren't going out and kidnapping people and becoming serial killers. That's not something that'll happen. It's a protective disorder. But I feel like that chunk of it, at least it was a really shitty portrayal. Like, it was a good portrayal in a very shitty context. The context of him waking up and seeing kidnapped girls in his basement was really not accurate and disgusting, but the portrayal of him freaking out and panicking because of his blackout and not remembering things was accurate. So I feel like that's another one of those gray areas where it's like, oh, this is a fantastic portrayal in a really disgusting context that would not happen. Another thing they did really well is showing the differences between alters. So the different alters, like for example, Patricia is really a proper lady. Dennis is a lot more like jerky and very much perfectionist. Hedwig is a little alter, and they did a very good job at showing the differences in mannerisms, the differences in quirks and personality traits of each of the alters. You could very much believe that these were very individual, separate people, even though the actor does not have DID. So I feel like that's something they did really well at showing the complete different ways that alters can be their complete own identities inside the body. And then the last thing that I think they got really accurate was they locked Kevin away to protect him from reality. At one point, one of the alters came out and was telling one of the girls they had captive, that Kevin wasn't going to be coming out anymore. He's locked away. He can't handle reality. And that's something I do think is accurate in the way that it can very much happen. If the host or an alter cannot handle reality, cannot handle functioning, cannot handle anything that's going on, it is very possible for that alter to be not allowed to front because of how they would handle the situation. And that's something that is very accurate. The inaccuracies of the movie is a surprisingly short list, but it's a powerful amount of inaccuracies. What I mean by that is, even though there's only a couple of inaccuracies, they are so disgustingly inaccurate, they overshadow all of the good representation in the movie. So one of the inaccuracies is Dennis being a pedophilic alter. Dennis in the movie is supposed to be a persecutor alter, or at least a representation of a persecutor alter. And one of the things they say at one point is that he likes to watch, I don't know if I can actually say this on YouTube, so I'm not going to say it, but that's what he is. And that is very inaccurate because, one, yes, persecutors can have toxic traits and do toxic things, but most of the time that's going to be directed at the body and not other people. And if it is directed at other people, usually it's more in a verbal protective sense It's not going to be someone just lashing out and attacking someone. It's not going to be someone having issues with that. And that's why I want to say, like, is it possible to have an alter that has pedophilic thoughts and that kind of stuff? I mean, I would be lying if I said that it's impossible. Is it common? Absolutely not. Is it something that happens regularly? Absolutely not. And is it something that happens enough for it to be notable? Absolutely not. Again, people with DID are much more likely to be abusive to the self than ever hurt another person. I feel like if there was a chance an alter had pedophilic thoughts, it would most often be an alter that developed that way in order to cope with a CSA trauma. And that is something that I don't think they would offend on. It would probably be something that they would go to therapy for. But again, Kevin didn't have any CSA trauma, so I feel like that alter developing didn't make any sense to the story. And again, I'm not saying that every system with CSA will have an alter with those kind of thoughts. I'm a system that went through CSA and I don't have those thoughts, but if it were to happen, I feel like that would be the most realistic explanation of that, because alters developing, even if in some way, shape, or form, is supposed to psychologically help the system in some way. So an alter developing that had pedophilic thoughts or having any abusive thoughts, that would only come into play if having those thoughts were in some way, shape, or form going to help the system. And that's very rarely going to happen. Another thing that's very inaccurate is an alter called Horde is a cannibal. Not going to happen. Not a thing. Again, we're more likely to hurt ourselves than alters hurting other people. So having a random alter develop that's a cannibal makes absolutely no sense. And then the last inaccuracy, which is the most inaccurate part of this, is having an alter called the Beast. Now, is it common to have non-human alters? Absolutely. Is it common to have alters that have animalistic or non-human mannerisms and personality traits? Absolutely. But the Beast alter had superhuman abilities to climb on walls and break iron, which is not going to happen in DID. And the Beast was extremely abusive and trying to hurt people, which again, you're not going to develop an alter for the sole purpose of climbing on walls and attacking young girls. That would provide utterly no defense to the system. So that's not something that's going to happen. That was something that was completely created by M. Night Shyamalan to further his superhero series for the Unbreakable series, by claiming that someone with DID can have a superhuman alter, which is not going to happen. So I digress in all of this. Although it was a very shitty representation of DID in a lot of ways, I do believe that there were the psychological aspects of the movie. There were a lot of great representations in how they handled it, but in the bigger context of, is this an accurate representation of DID? Absolutely not. There were many things they could have done better. And I feel like the negative stereotypes of the movie greatly overshadows how great of a performance the actor did. And I feel like that's very disappointing, because they could have made a very fantastic film, and there were many great portrayals that they did in the film, and it's very disappointing to see it overshadowed by all of the stigma and all of the abusive, supernatural, disgusting, criminal aspects of the things that the alters did, and I feel like that's very disappointing. But that is my opinion on the movie Split. and DID in the media and how it was portrayed. My next episode is probably going to be on Moon Knight. And then I'm probably going to go back to some TV shows. But thank you guys for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.